A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the half hour. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance says the U.S. would apply more economic pressure on Venezuela to ensure compliance with President Donald Trump's priorities. Speaking of Donald Trump, he might be meeting with the Colombian counterpart, Gustavo Petro, at the White House in the near future. Plus, domestic problems for Trump as protests erupt across Minneapolis following the fatal shooting of a 37-year-old. Let's get into it. The Trump administration has reaffirmed plans to dictate terms of engagement with Venezuela in the period following the capture of leader Nicolas Maduro over the weekend. On Wednesday, Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt faced a volley of questions about the extent of Trump's role in the governance of Venezuela. President Trump claims that the country is now under U.S. control and that the U.S. is going to run the country until a time for safe, proper, and judicious transition, even though Vice President Delcy Rodriguez has already been sworn in as interim president. Trump says the U.S. involvement in Venezuela could last for years, telling the New York Times only time will tell how long his administration would oversee the running of the South American nation. He has also not said if or when elections will be held in Venezuela to replace the interim government. Earlier this week, he declared the interim authorities in Venezuela would be turning over between 30 and 50 million barrels of high-quality sanctioned oil to the United States. Now, here's Vice President J.D. Vance also weighing in on the U.S. administration of Venezuela.
First of all, what it means is we're going to be able to control the incredible natural resources of Venezuela, which is good for America in a few ways. Number one, it allows us to put leverage on our enemies. Number two, it makes sure that if Americans need high-quality, low-cost power, we're always going to have access to it. And then the third thing is it does demonstrate American military excellence, which makes people afraid to cross us in the future. Some of the best ways that you maintain the peace is to make it clear that you carry a very strong sword if you ever need to use it. So I think it's good for us in a lot of different ways. We also have to remember this is in our neighborhood. This is not Iraq. This is not 7,000 miles away. This is in our neighborhood. If we cannot follow the basic principle, which has been a cornerstone of American foreign policy for 200 years, that we control our neighborhood, a lot of bad people are going to take advantage of it. What the President of the United States said is, in our neighborhood, the United States calls the shots. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it is again under the President's leadership. But people always ask, how do you control Venezuela? And we're actually seeing it play out in real time. The way that we control Venezuela is we control the purse strings, we control the energy resources, and we tell the regime, you're allowed to sell the oil so long as you serve America's national interest. You're not allowed to sell it if you can't serve America's national interest. And that's how we exert incredible pressure on that country without wasting a single American life, without endangering a single American citizen. That is called critical, high-quality diplomacy. We've done it time and again, but we just did it in Venezuela. We engage in a law enforcement action. We had a legitimate indictment for Maduro for narco-terrorism, for weapons smuggling and weapons trafficking, and we went in with the best military in the world. We got our guy. He's going to stand trial. By the way, he's given the full due process rights that are entitled to anybody who's in the United States. I think he's going to go away. He's going to be found guilty. That's not a kidnapping. That's a law enforcement operation.
Vice President J.D. Vance. In the meantime, the United Nations has responded to comments by the United States suggesting Washington could manage or control the country's oil production. Secretary General Antonio Guterres' spokesperson Stefan Dujarric on Wednesday said that Venezuela's oil belongs to his people. Responding to questions about reports that the U.S. had captured 2 Venezuelan-linked Russian oil tankers, Dujarric stressed that maritime actions must comply with international law. Dujarric also confirmed that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had met Venezuela's permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Samuel Moncada, at the UN headquarters.
At this stage, we do not have sufficient information to say anything further to what our stated position is on these issues, which is that all law enforcement actions on the oceans and seas are to be taken in accordance with applicable international law, in order to ensure maritime safety and security on the high seas. And we would want to see avoidance of any further escalation. It's not so much a reaction as what our position has been throughout, whether it's Venezuela or other countries where this issue has risen. The oil in Venezuela belongs to the Venezuelan people, just as the oil in Syria belongs to the Syrian people, and the natural resources of any country belong to the people of that country. We know there have been what word should we use? Issues, tensions between the government and the opposition, and the Secretary General is offering his good offices to help a national dialogue in Venezuela.
Let's bring in geopolitical analyst Onyekachi Adekoya. He joins us now to discuss these and other developments regarding the Trump administration's activities in the Western Hemisphere. Onyekachi, thanks for joining us on the program. A happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, Marachi, and thanks for having me.
Now, I've heard some U.S. analysts talk about the U.S. entering into a forever war with Venezuela, even though, U.S. officials have said that's not the case. A former U.S. Marine and founder of Blackwater Security says that U.S. could go into more countries where there is political crisis, even in Africa, and run the governments for them. Do you think this is a priority for the Trump administration?
Yeah, Amarachi, so I listened to the Vice President of the U.S. Reel out what is classically known as the Monroe Doctrine, although there's a bit of a variance with what should be known as the non-interference position of the Monroe Doctrine, which while the U.S. says it will recognize its hemisphere as its domain of influence, but then it would not be given towards interference within that hemisphere. Doesn't mean now that the U.S. would replace a hegemon, which was Europe, in its hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine says that the hemisphere will be free from any hegemon and things like that. But to answer your question, given the statements from Marco Rubio, statements from President Trump, it does look like we're now back to what is called the Caucasian or the Jacksonian expansionism of U.S. Foreign policy. You've seen President Trump talk about Greenland, and he doesn't look like he's joking about it. The Americans are going to have a meeting on Greenland. And, so it does look like that's a bit of a priority, though we understand the other macroeconomic drivers that are pushing the U.S. towards its position. So there's no straight answer, but in the U.S. typical nature of strategic ambiguity, I think that we can fairly say that the position of the U.S. is crystallizing towards an expansionist American first policy.
And I've heard countries have condemned America's actions. We've seen the South African president condemn the actions as well as the UN, even though there's been no serious reprimand for the United States. NATO is on shaky ground right now because the US could is already threatening to pull out of NATO. If it does, NATO, of course, might fall apart. The US withdrawal from the UN also seems more possible now than ever before. It seems we're back to the days of not just strategic ambiguism, but also the days of imperialism. As you rightly said, the U.S. replacing the hegemon of Europe in many of these countries. Do you think that other superpowers, and I know that a lot of international analysts are looking at this, other superpowers such as Russia and China will take their cue from the United States and also become hegemons themselves?
Amarachi, so you've punched in a lot of things into that one question, but I think it's just to surmise that we are seeing the near death or the near complete irrelevance of the UN as a multilateral organization for aggregating consensus among nations. Given a speech, a paper actually on geopolitics and the emerging global strategic alliance world order, which would seem to replace a multilateral agreement where you have the UN Security Council being the control of the UN into what you now have as strategic alliances that benefit nation states either by geopolitical leaning or in terms of macroeconomic leaning or along the lines of ideology. So I think that is what we would see, or that's what we're seeing and continue to see in the near term. Whether it gives Russia or China signals, I mean, you can look at the South China Sea and the Eastern Indo-Pacific. China is clearly making a stake, creating island positions, forward operating bases for its navy. China has built a significant blue water navy, although not battle tested. The Russians are claiming their own sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. Of course, you know the promise NATO made to Russia as a successor entitled to the USSR for them not to expand east. Of course, you have the war in Ukraine, you have the issues in the Caucasus. Again, we're just seeing what I talked about, the emergence of BRICS. NATO will still be there. I don't see NATO going anywhere anytime soon. Even though some will argue that Europe is no longer the center of power and of relevance as it once used to be, and to now argue that influence has moved east. So yes, there's an argument to make that the world sits on three legs, as it were, the axis of China, Russia, and the United States, with Europe increasingly becoming a bit out of play, as it were. So it doesn't give China or Russia the cue to take certain steps, because some would also argue that perhaps the calculation is that maybe the US wants China to come out of the shell and take a more hawkish stand, and then a series of other actions will ripple in against China. Because remember, it is in China's best interest for business to continue as usual, for China to continue to do business without getting itself involved in any wars. America and Russia, on their part, have been involved in one war or the other and have almost stretched themselves thin. So while Russia is being distracted in Ukraine, America's had leverage to moving on Syria, Iran, and now Venezuela. So I'm sure China is being very calculative in their nature, not wanting to take the bait. So Amarachi, it's a bit of a geopolitical chessboard that we have all set out here. So we don't have the time for all those permutation analysis. But yes, China is taking a cue. But whether China will go the way of America, I don't think so in the near term.
Yeah. And I know that the Chinese, as you rightly mentioned, are very calculative. They usually they don't toe anyone's line. They just, unilaterally make their own decisions. But what can we expect from a world dominated by might is right, which is where we're at right now?
Well, it's been incipient and for some time now. If you look at the unilateral actions of the United States in particular, since the fall of the Soviet Union, you could count almost over 10 to 15 wars and foreign fund invasions. And some are arguing now that, yes, we're rightly in a multipolar world. And some of the agitations we saw when you had a tussle between two blocks, USSR and the NATO alliance, is now coming back to the fore.
Indeed.
Amarachi, can you hear me?
So, yes, I can. Unfortunately, that is the much that we can take on this interview. I do apologize. You will have to come back. The issue is still on the front burner here on The World Today. Thank you so much, Onikachi, for your analysis on this issue.
Thank you for having me.
In another development, the U.S. president has withdrawn the country from dozens of international organizations, nearly half of which are UN-related, including the Framework Convention on Climate Change, a treaty that underpins all international efforts to combat global warming. Non-UN organizations affected include those focused on clean energy, cooperation, democratic governance, and international security, such as the International Solar Alliance, the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, and the Global Counterterrorism Forum. President Trump already has stripped many multilateral organizations he dislikes of funds and previously rejected the scientific consensus of man-made climate change as a hoax. While the U.S. Constitution allows presidents to join treaties provided 2/3 of senators present concur, it does not specify what happens if they were to withdraw, which means that Trump's move could face legal challenges. These latest withdrawals come after the president withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement for a second time last year and declined to send a delegation to the COP30 climate summit in Brazil. And President Donald Trump intends to invite Colombia's President Gustavo Petro to the White House in the near future, he says, just days after saying an operation targeting Colombia does sound good to him. During a call with Trump, Petro explained the situation of drugs and other disagreements. President Trump said that he appreciated the Colombia president's tone earlier this week. Trump had issued a warning to Petro, telling him to watch his behind. Colombia is a key hub for the region's drug trade, most notably cocaine, as well as having substantial oil reserves. It also has it's a major producer of gold, silver, emerald, and platinum and coal. Speaking aboard Air Force One following the operation in Venezuela, Trump did describe the Colombian president as a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States, adding he's not going to be doing it for very long. Trump's words. We're back to the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, who says Greenland is critical for the defense of the U.S. and the world against possible Russian or Chinese missile attacks, and that Europe and Denmark have not done a good job in securing the area. Vance told Fox News recently they had not only underinvested in Greenland's defenses, but also failed to engage with President Trump's argument over the issue. U.S. officials are actively discussing a potential offer to buy Greenland, a semi-autonomous Danish territory. The White House has confirmed this a day after suggesting military action to annex Greenland is also an option. Denmark, a fellow NATO member, has warned this will spell the end of the alliance. Both Greenland and Denmark have repeatedly stressed the island is not for sale. We're heading out to a break now on The World Today. Still ahead. 3 wise men bring gifts to Milan in colorful procession, marking the end of the festive season in Italy. Stay with us. So a bit longer in the United States, hundreds of protesters out on the streets near the Henry M. Jackson Federal Building in downtown Seattle on Wednesday night as nationwide demonstrations gripped the United States following the fatal shooting of a Minneapolis woman by ICE officials. Crowds marched behind a large banner bearing the slogan "Abolish ICE," while chanting slogans as you hear there, releasing smoke and waving the placards. The 37-year-old mother was fatally shot by a federal agent during an ICE operation in South Minneapolis. The shooting happened Wednesday morning. She was identified as Renee Nicole Good, a U.S. citizen. Minneapolis said, the police said that she was not a target of the operation. A video circulating online showed multiple federal agents surrounding a Burgundy Honda Pilot stopped in a roadway near East 34th Street and Portland Avenue. Agents were seen shouting commands at the driver. Federal officials defended the shooting, saying that it was an act of domestic terrorism. One of those propagating the belief that it was an act of terrorism is Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, who defended the ICE agents who shot and killed Renee, saying that he acted in self-defense. She said the 37-year-old U.S. citizen was harassing and impeding law enforcement operations and claimed she had struck the officer with her vehicle. According to local media, Renee, the mother of 3, was in her SUV monitoring federal enforcement activity when agents approached. An ICE officer fired at least 3 shots through the windshield as the vehicle moved forward. She was later pronounced dead at Hennepin Healthcare.
say that he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's very clear that this individual was harassing and impeding law enforcement operations. Our officer followed his training, did exactly what he's been taught to do in that situation, and took actions to defend himself and defend his fellow law enforcement officer. The officer was hit by the vehicle. She hit him. He went to the hospital. A doctor did treat him. He has been released, but he's going to spend some time with his family.
Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, joins us now. Maria, this is reminiscent of the George Floyd case. We're back to law enforcement not taking responsibility for their actions. Unfortunately, Good is not here to give her side of the story. How do Americans across the country feel about what happened? And is there a video record, perhaps, of what exactly transpired between Renee Good and the ICE official?
Yes, we are back again. And as you said, we remember talking about George Floyd. Minneapolis has been, the Twin Cities, St. Paul and Minneapolis have been obviously dealing with these unfortunate events for quite some time. This event, though, as I heard you mention, this is a U.S. citizen. This was someone that was not being targeted by ICE. They're considering this domestic terror. But if you watch the video, and you just asked around whether or not there's video that shows this, there's actually several angles of the video that actually that have been shown here in the U.S. where you will see the woman driving off. It looks as if the ICE agent is walking to the left. There was an exchange between the woman and the ICE agent, and it looks like he's walking to the left and she's driving to the right. Because even if you look at the angle from which he's shooting and shot through the window of the vehicle, it was behind. He was behind her, not at the driver's side, not in front of the vehicle, but actually behind the vehicle. And that's where she was, actually her life was taken right there as it went through the driver's side window. And so, this is, I think, an event that has many Americans just overwhelmingly, many angry, upset, challenged with what is actually going on. And you are seeing this from across the board. The Americans that are right there in Minneapolis that have gone out to protest very early this morning. There was a couple hundred at the beginning of the morning that obviously were just outraged as to what had happened. This very tragic incident, as they mentioned, this is a woman, a mother of three, recently lost their dad, the children did, and so now they're without a mother and a father. This woman there is stating she was kind of one of those, what they call trackers. Their ICE agents have become very large and vast. There's only about 700 police in Minneapolis, but 2,000 ICE agents. And so many citizens and advocates for the rights of immigrants in the United States, and especially in Minneapolis, have been doing what they call tracking and trying to ensure that the ICE agents are following within the law in their treatment of individuals. So this is going to be a large investigation. Obviously, right now, the hope is just to keep the area and the city at peace as they can. The governor has called for peace in the city and has stated don't allow the ICE agents to create people to get outraged, which then could create even further turmoil in the city. We've seen several arrests that have happened for individuals that have been outraged and have gone into confrontation with the ICE agents. So it's just a time of major devastation and tragedy in the U.S.
And the anger is all targeted at ICE agents across the United States because of the order they have been given by the Trump administration to go into any and everywhere now to pick undocumented immigrants in the United States. President Trump, what sort of precedent does this set, for the rest of America going forward? People are dying because, they've been picked up by ICE agents. They've been beaten. Sometimes they're not picking the right people. How do American law enforcement feel about what's going on, and what does the law really say, about how far the jurisdiction of ICE goes in the U.S.?
That is, I think, the crux of what's happening right now. One of the things we've been notified around is the police in Minneapolis, if they are called in, They are actually called in to protect the people and to be a buffer between the ICE agents and the citizens of Minneapolis or those who are there protesting. So that is a very different stance than what typically we've seen. Typically, you see the federal law enforcement, state and local law enforcement working collaboratively together. And so this is going to definitely be setting a precedence for something we really have not typically seen previously. But we know that right now the governor is trying to hold back, but they are on standby, the National Guard for Minneapolis, which would then again be at the orders of the Minneapolis and the Minnesota governor, which is very different than those National Guard individuals and ICE agents that are called forth by the president. So this is a very unpredictable times, times that we've never seen before, as far as when you think about law enforcement kind of almost having separate ends of operation or seven separate ends of leadership and direction, and potentially could be actually going after two very different operations and intentions. So we're at a pivotal time. The hope is that the peace can stay because the president, as you've noted, has been the director, and the federal government has been the director and directorate of these ICE agents. And where the line does cross, the ICE agents are there, as you mentioned, for the immigration challenges
Right.
that the U.S. and the immigration laws. So,
Maria, thanks again for the update, especially regarding Renee and her family. Her thoughts and prayers are with her and with others who have also lost their lives in the immigration raids. Thanks again. We're going to end the world today on a rather high note. Hundreds gathering in Milan is happening Tuesday for the annual procession of the Magi, one of the city's oldest and most popular traditions marking the close of the festive season. We're looking at participants marching through Piazza del Duomo to the sound of bagpipes. On cue, dressed in colorful costumes, the procession ended at the Basilica di Santo Stogio, where spectators watched the three wise men symbolically offer their gifts to complete the nativity scene. The Magi procession in Milan has deep historical roots, tracing back to the 4th century when Bishop Estorgio is believed to have brought the relics of the three kings from Constantinople to what was then the Lombard capital. The parade itself dates to 1336, when celebrations honoring the three kings were officially established. In 1347, the School of the Three Magi was founded at the Church of San Destorgio, tasked with organizing the sacred representation associated with the event. That's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi.